event. Swami Tattwamayananda is a monk of Ramakrishna order. He received his traditional training as a scholar in Sanskrit, in Vedic studies, and in Indian philosophy, with a special focus on Advaita Vedanta and with additional emphasis on the study of Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature. He was assigned to various centers of Ramakrishna order in India as editor, publisher, and teacher. In addition to Sanskrit and Indian philosophy, he has also taught Hindu, Vedantic, and Buddhist scriptures. He has often been invited to attend international conferences dealing with traditional Vedic scriptures. In January 2012, he was asked by the order to come to the United States. Currently, he is serving as a minister in charge of Vedanta Society of Northern California in San Francisco. So, without further delay, please.
Thank you for that generous introduction, interview, and thank you for giving me a chance to meet all of you here and speak a few words on this very interesting subject, the battle within. Now, battle within implies that we are all engaged in some kind of a struggle in our hearts and minds. In fact, this morning I had a talk at the university on a subject which is not unrelated to what we are discussing now. That is about a natural conflict, a contrast between what we normally want to do and what we normally end up doing. How we want to live and how much our mind is willing to cooperate with us in our effort to what we want to do and what we want to achieve. In Indian psychology, especially in the yoga psychology, the great writers like Patanjali, Vyasa and others, they give a very interesting analysis of the world of human mind. According to the level of the tranquility and peace that we experience within, our mind is studied at 5 different levels. I shall try to explain this, then I shall enter the subject straight away. The first 2 steps are called Kshipta and Vikshipta. So Kshipta and Mudha. Kshipta means normally those who are suffering from internal conflicts, restlessness, and Mudha means a kind of stupor, inactivity. In fact, these are more or less stages of some sort of an abnormality of human mind. We are not concerned with that. And the 4th and 5th stage, Ekagra, highly focused, highly concentrated, and highly transcendental. That also is not within our scope. So our scope is the 3rd stage between the 2 below and the 2 above. The natural state of a human being who tries to practice meditation, who wants to go to a church or a temple, wants to read a good book, wants to do something that will give us a feeling of inner contentment, happiness and tranquility. So that's the most precious thing. We find people who want to achieve success and they succeed in piling up billions of dollars, but they can't get 4 hours of sleep without the help of taking sleeping pills. Now, is that success? It is success only in a very lopsided sense. Because success becomes successful, real success, only when we are able to enjoy our success. We are not able to enjoy success when we succeed, and at the same time when we cannot live a contented life. It is not real success. So according to Indian psychologists, the normal state of human mind is often compared to a pendulum, a clock. It moves from one extreme to the other extreme. It never stands in the middle. See, for example, when you are listening to this talk, or maybe tomorrow you may go to church, or any place of worship, or when you read a Sermon on the Mount, when you read, let's say, Bhagavad Gita, or when you attend a beautiful spiritual musical program, you feel a great joy. But when you return from the church, when you're back in your own home, in your own room, then you feel disturbance again. Again, next Sunday, perhaps when you come to the church, again you feel a great joy. So, this is the natural state of human mind. This is the real battle. I mean, we want to achieve something, and we achieve for some time, but it stays only for a short time, and we are not able to remain in a state of stability and peace. This is the real battle. Now, in our spiritual life, the state of healthy mindedness according to Indian school of medicine. You may have heard of Ayurveda. Yeah. Ayurveda is an ancient school of medicine. They define a healthy person in a very beautiful verse. It's from Charaka Samhita, and it's also quoted in Susuda, and it's been taken up by WHO. They also quote this. You see, it is Samadhatu Samatnischa Samadhatu Malakriyaha Prasanna Atmendriyamana Sustaita Vidiyade. Sometimes it's Samadosha Samatnischa Samadhatu Malakriyaha Prasanna Atmendriyamana Sustaita Vidiyade. This is the definition. It's a Sanskrit verse, but Sustha means healthy person. Healthy not only physically. So the first part of the verse defines a state of physical health. The second part is a beautiful and comprehensive definition and a very scientific definition of healthy mindedness. So who is a healthy person? A healthy person is one whose mind, senses and again Atman is in a state of perfect harmony, a total balance and peace. This is the real state of healthy mindedness. Now, when we reach this state of healthy mindedness, our mind will become our friend. How do we recognize a friend? When we want to do something positive for our own good, for our own welfare, if our friend helps us, encourages us, maybe in trying to find a solution for a problem we are confronting, that person is the one who we call a friend, a real friend. Now, when our mind encourages, helps and supports and cooperates, when we want to do something good and noble, that mind is our friend. In other words, you can easily relate this in our everyday life. When there are many things that we want to do, and we know that it is important for us to do, say meditation or prayer or reading good books, all these are certainly great things that most frequently your teacher must have instructed you when you are in kindergarten, in schools. Right from our early schooling, teachers, ideal teachers inspire us to read good books, to do good things, to follow healthy habits, physical and mental healthy habits. But then when we try to do, our mind doesn't always help us in what we want to do. So, how to turn an unhelpful, an unfriendly mind into a friendly mind? That is the subject before us. So the first step is we should know what is our mind, and according to Indian psychology, our mind is the totality of all the experiences that we have undergone in our past life cycles. This is an important point we have to remember. Whenever we enter the world of Indian philosophy or Indian psychology or Indian spirituality, there are two important principles we have to keep in mind. The first one is they accept the doctrine of reincarnation, of these continuing cycles of life, being born, living, dying and reborn. That means when we die, that's not the end of the journey. It is only a transition. When I go from Fargo to San Francisco, I have to change the plane in Minneapolis. Like that, death is only a transition point. It's not the destination. This one important point we should remember. Secondly, another important thing is that whatever we do will have some effect on our mind and our personality. Whatever we are doing now, it doesn't happen in an isolated form. It is the sum total of what we have been doing in our innumerable life cycles in the past. Once we understand this, there is something we have to keep in mind, and that will give us a tremendous self-confidence. In the well-known Sanskrit text Bhagavad Gita, it's a dialogue between a divine teacher and this divine disciple. One question that the student, his name is Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, that he puts to his teacher is a very important question. Suppose I have meditated for some time all my life, and suppose I have gone to temples and churches, I have attended all the important religious, spiritual rituals and programs, and then if I die without reaching my spiritual goal, does it mean that whatever I have done will be lost? Often this is one important, actually traumatic question that our own mind asks. Am I going to succeed? I've been attending prayers, I've been attending Vedanta classes, I've been attending church programs, different religious programs, but I don't feel I have achieved anything. I feel a total backward. Suppose I die before I reach my spiritual goal. Is it that everything will be lost? The answer that the Lord Krishna gives is something very interesting. The answer is, you won't lose anything and you are never too late. So whatever you do, if you attend, let's say if you pray for a few years, read some holy books, maybe just for a few years, and then you forget, whatever spiritual efforts you have made in this life will not be lost, it will be deposited in a spiritual bank. When you are reborn again, you will be born with a fountain pen and a checkbook. What it means is, you can continue your journey from where you have left in this life. The question is, those who know Gita, ayadi shraddhayo peda yoga charita manasaka aprapa yoga samsiddhim kalgadim krishna gacchati is the question. If a person dies, suppose, well, this is a big question. In fact, it is this traumatic self-doubt and conflict that often makes our mind restless. Am I really going to achieve something? I don't understand what this book tells me. I don't understand the meaning of many of these lectures. And I don't understand the prayer that's going on in the church or any place of worship. But I have wasted 2 hours, 3 hours every week or maybe every day. But I didn't gain anything. Is it total? We don't want to waste our time. Lord Krishna's answer is, even if you pray once in your life, even if you read one book, one holy book, once in your life, you have already put some money in your spiritual bank. And you will not lose that. So Lord Krishna says, Purvabhyasena tenaiva hiridi avasopi saka jijnasuraviyogasya sabda brahmadi vatade. These verses, don't worry, those of you who are unfamiliar, but I shall explain in English, you won't lose anything. What Lord Krishna says, when you are reborn again, you will be born with this spiritual inheritance that is yours. You will not lose anything. Whatever you have done in one life, maybe for a very short time, that will not be lost. And that's why, when we go to a holy place, it could be any holy place, or when you attend a spiritual music program, or a spiritual, let's say a lecture program discussing spirituality, we feel at home. When we return to our home, we may not be able to continue that feeling, but when we are right in the church or a temple, when we are actually attending the program, we feel a kind of feeling at home. Means we feel this is something that I can connect with, I can relate with. That's because we have already deposited some money in our spiritual bank. We have already accumulated some good tendencies, what you call samskaras in Sanskrit language, impressions, in our previous life. By the strength of those samskaras, we are able to even able to tolerate this spiritual part. If a person has no spiritual samskaras, spiritual tendencies in his spiritual inheritance, then he won't be able to tolerate a great spiritual music. Because in order to connect with what is going on in front of us, we should have a little bit of that within our own mind. So the one task before us to resolve this inner conflict is to generate more and more spiritual resources, to put in our spiritual bank more and more spiritual wealth, so that our mind will generate more spiritual samskaras, tendencies, so that our mind will help us when we try to meditate, when we try to contemplate, when we try to concentrate on some holy task. Mind is like a bundle. So there are two illustrations in the classical works. We try to understand, analyze human mind. One illustration is like a lake. Another illustration is like a bundle. Lake means several layers of dirt and filth, and therefore we cannot see the rock bottom of the lake. So we are not able to relate, we are not able to feel at home in the world of spiritual ideas because of unhelpful samskaras, unhealthy tendencies that are already there at the lower layers of our mind. And if you take the other illustration, what you call the bundle, then what it means is, say for example, in a bundle, let's say there are two types of tendencies, good and bad. When we don't have enough of good samskaras, good tendencies, then if you try to meditate, if you try to pray, immediately the mind will revolt. We want to get out of the place of the meditation room. We want to stop reading the Sermon on the Mount or the Gita or Dhammapada or whatever we are trying to do, and we want to read some comics, some thrillers, something, because our mind is connecting with those things rather than the holy ideas, spiritually elevating ideas. So how to help our mind to become more friendly when we try to do something positive, to generate more and more spiritual ideas, spiritual tendencies. For that, normally in our spiritual tradition, the most important recommendation given is a harmonious synthesis of human effort and belief in God's grace. The synthesis of or harmony of our own effort. But when we make our own effort, we may have a lot of skepticism and self-doubt. We are not sure whether we are making progress or we are moving in the right direction. In order to avoid that problem, we should have faith in God. So a harmonious blending of our effort and God's grace. There are many interesting examples in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and also those of you are familiar with in the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. This very unique concept of the harmony of God's grace and human effort. Sri Ramakrishna, for example, sometimes, suppose you want to cross a river, let's say, and you want to you make use of the boat that is anchored on one bank of the river. So first you should get up, you should get rid of your laziness, you should untie the anchor, you could remove the rope that ties the boat to the anchor, then you should row for some distance, and when you reach the middle of the river, you can make use of the wind that is blowing and you can cross the river. But for that, you have to make your own effort. You have to get up. And you have to break the chain that binds the boat to the anchor, to its bound. And then you have to row for some distance. And when you reach the middle of the river, then you can find the wind is blowing, you can make use of the wind, and you can reach the other bank of the river. And there are many illustrations, the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, but there is one striking illustration that is frequently quoted by Christian mystics. That is in the autobiographical writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. So she talks about a farmer who wants to irrigate his field, and he wants to bring water from a water mill. He can use a water mill. He can bring water maybe in buckets. He can cut a canal. There are different ways of irrigating the field. But one important point: before you bring water to the field should be made ready. Right now the field is full of thorns, pebbles, stones and weeds, of course. If you irrigate the field before and without removing the weeds, the stones, it won't bear fruit. It will be of no use. So first of all, you should make your own effort. And the effort corresponds to removing the weeds, removing the stones and pebbles, thorns and all these things are spread out all over the field. And then you can cut a canal, you can bring water, you can irrigate the field. And by the time you make your efforts to irrigate the field, maybe it will start raining. So this is what really happens. Very often people start thinking, but what will happen? And they won't make the first move. I have found this frequently. People ask the question, well, we pray, and then what happens? A prayer is going to, suppose the prayer doesn't work, and suppose it works, it doesn't produce enough result. Actually, before we make the first step, first effort, we are asking many questions. The point is, as we make our effort, our mind also will evolve. Very often in spiritual life, questions are not answered. Questions just disappear. The questions that our mind asks us, even these conflicts, we don't have a solution to the conflicts. The conflicts cease to be conflicts. When we become strong enough spiritually, then the problems are no more problems. The problems are problems only because we don't take the first step. This is a mystery of spiritual life. When we start practicing some disciplines, from then onwards you find the way our mind handles the problems, the way our mind looks at our own life undergoes a complete change. And then you find slowly questions slowly become non-questions. Problems slowly cease to be problems. This is what really happens in spiritual life. So harmonious blending of our effort and also God's grace. There is an interesting illustration in Holy Mother's life. Holy Mother is one of in our spiritual tradition. Holy Mother is a great teacher who took the responsibility of guiding our monastic order after Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's Guru passed away. So some people went to Holy Mother, asked this question. Since you have already given your blessing, so it does mean that we don't have to do anything? Then Mother said, no, you have to do your own work. You cannot just say, you cannot neglect your own effort. You have to make your own effort. Because if somebody gives you something, you should be able to receive it. If you don't receive it, then so long as you don't receive it, you have not got it. So only what we earn becomes ours. Everything that we get may not become ours. Only what we deserve to get, that alone really becomes ours. And on another occasion, some other devotees went to Holy Mother. They said, no, Mother, we are praying all the time. We are practicing so many spiritual disciplines. So naturally, still nothing happens. Why is it that we are meditating so much? Nothing happens. Then Holy Mother says, so God is not something that you buy in the market. You go to the market, your credit card, so you naturally you expect something, maybe GMI free, you may organic, all that you're paid. So God is not something, spirituality is not something that you can buy. It is something that you realize within your own heart. It doesn't come from outside. For that, we must make enough efforts. It's just like we only remove the obstacles. When we remove the obstacles, what happens is the solution of the problems. I gave this example this morning. Actually, it's from Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Say, Nimittam aprayojagam prakritinam varanam vedastu tada kshetrikavad. This is a sutra, but I shall explain. Point is something very interesting. Suppose you want to irrigate a field and cut a canal. What do? You are actually removing that part of the earth from that root of the canal. You are not actually connecting the river to the field. You are only removing that part of the soil from that place, and then what happens? The water starts flowing into the canal. In other words, our effort and God's grace. These are two important things. And another problem is that frequently we when we face a problem, we think it is a problem. But in spiritual psychology, every problem is a recognition, it is an affirmation that God has given you a place in His consideration. There is a famous verse in Hindu devotional scriptures. That means, I can quote this, you see. It says, those whom God wants to bless, you give number of problems. Suppose a very rich man, when he becomes too rich, too powerful, and that makes him too worldly, and God has a soft corner for him, He will remove all the money from him. He will turn him into a pauper. But in such a way that he will be forced to turn his eyes in the direction of God. So, that is an interesting. Again, if a person becomes proud of his popularity, God will take away all his followers from him, so that he will be forced to turn his eyes towards God. In other words, every obstacle, every problem is recognized to be an opportunity to open our eyes in the direction of the transcendental. When this happens, when we can consider every problem as an opportunity, then you find these inner conflicts will be resolved. In other words, every opportunity is a golden opportunity to move closer to God. That's why there's a prayer in one of our Upanishads. The prayer is very touching. A man who is about to die, he is praying to his own mind. It comes to the end of the Ishavasya Upanishad. You know the prayer, oh mind, think of all the noble deeds you have done. Think of all the great things you have spoken, all the noble things, all the kind activity, all the kind words you have spoken, all the kind compassionate acts you have done, so that when I take step in my next life, then I will be I will be entering a higher life, so that I can continue my spiritual journey from next life. This you can find in the life of one great Indian author. You know, maybe the most well-known and the most voluminous author of Sanskrit tradition is Vyasa. He is the one who edited the 4 Vedas. He wrote 36 Puranas. Well, I don't have to, if you may need a big bookshelf to store all his books. This Vyasa, and also he was the teacher of many disciples. He was running the most important Vedic hermitage, the Vedic seminary, so to speak, in ancient Vedic times. And this man was suffering from withdrawal symptoms and depression. It's a very interesting story. How he happened to write what is now considered to be the most moving devotional classic called Fargo. He was one day sitting on the banks of river Saraswati. I remember, in modern times, let us say, suppose you have a big CEO with billions of dollars, the most highly paid attorney or CEO, whatever may be, with so many companies under his command. Suppose he feels a kind of inner depression, withdrawal symptom, something like that, or maybe he's the greatest author. So Vyasa was one day sitting on the banks of river Saraswati. Then another sage came there. This was this discussion. This battle within, you can see here, unfolding before us. Vyasa said, look here, the other sage who came to be sitting was Narada. Look here, Narada, I have written all these great books. And my own disciples have become so prominent. All the greatest professors of the Vedic hermitages of those times were Vyasa's disciples. They became famous by writing commentaries on his books. So, but this man, this old great teacher himself, was unhappy. He thought of his own life and there was a vacuum with him. Mind was not at peace. Then Narada told him, I shall give you the reason why you are not able to feel this inner fulfillment and contentment. The reason is, you did not do anything that would be helpful for others. Vyasa wrote great philosophical books, let us say Kant's philosophy, Critique of Pure Reason, Critical Practical Reason, or all the works of maybe Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Philo, Porphyry, Neoplato, everything. And if that author of all these books becomes totally depressed, you can imagine, that is why Vyasa's condition. So Narada told him, you should do something that will be directly helpful to other spiritual seekers. That will be a great blessing to others. Your great philosophical books are not enough. You should write something that by reading which others feel that this is the road for my spiritual journey. And then he wrote Bhagavata Purana. So when he wrote that book, when he finished that book, 18,000 verses in 12 sections with 335 chapters, when he finished that book, he became completely happy. Narada returned after some time, told him, look here, now you feel an inner contentment. That's because you did something for others. You did something that gave peace to others. So when we do something that will give peace to other people, then we will get peace of mind. So because the world is one. Human mind, if you take individually, it may be different one from the other. But if you help one individual, if you do one noble deed, that noble deed, if you speak one kind word, one single noble, kind, compassionate act will produce something in your mind. Well, I have done something. I have done something really meaningful, really useful, helpful for others. Then you will get peace of mind. So this was what Narada said, and Vyasa realized this. So what we need today is, we should not, and this is very important to remember, we should not divide our life into different compartments. That's another important reason for conflict. People at the beginning of spiritual life, two hours in the morning I shall spend for prayer. Maybe half an hour every morning. And the rest of my life, secular life. So people, that frequently we do, that's the one important reason for this inner conflict. We divide our life into secular and spiritual. So the first step is to connect a bridge between the so-called secular and spiritual. And if we can do whatever we are doing, whatever may be our profession, if we can do whatever we do as an act of worship, if we can bring in an element of sanctity, sacredness, into whatever we do, into what we speak, what we think and what we act, then every minute, every act will become a spiritual activity. we can actually spiritualize the secular. Frequently, what happens in modern times, even the spiritual becomes secularized. What we need today is, we should first of all bridge a gap between the secular and spiritual. At the beginning, every act can be done as an act of worship. And eventually you feel every act is a worship. For finally, there is only worship. So at the beginning, we may be able to do every secular activity as a spiritual activity. Eventually, every secular activity can be spiritualized. How to spiritualize our secular activity? Bringing an element of sanctity, sacredness, and unselfishness. Even the smallest activity can become a spiritual activity when it is done with an element of unselfishness. Even the most profound, the most extensive spiritual activity will cease to be spiritual when it is done with a selfish motive. At the same time, even the most everyday activity that we normally consider to be secular, like teaching, treating patients in a hospital, or maybe doing engineering, medicine, teaching, or plumbing, or whatever it is. Every one of the so-called secular activities can be turned into spiritual activity. It means spiritualizing the secular. Once we do that, then actually there will be no conflict in our mind. Actually, there is no real solution for psychological problems at the psychological level. You can very easily find. Most of the psychological problems do not have lasting remedies at the psychological level. You can postpone the problem, we can weaken or neutralize the symptoms, but there is no lasting remedy for many of the problems. That's because we are trying to find a solution to psychological level at the psychological level. The real solution for psychological problems is at the spiritual level. In spiritual level, you can find solution to the psychological. And how to find a solution? By spiritualizing the secular. By removing this artificial line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual, by bringing spirituality into our everyday life, into our ordinary life situations. Then only we can remove these conflicts that is natural in modern times. It means spiritualizing the secular and bringing spirituality into everyday life situations. That's one solution we can find. I will be happy to deal with this subject much more elaborately during interactions. You are most welcome to ask questions and be happy to try to respond. Thank you.
Swami, I have one question that is maybe on the topic. So, for example, you were saying when you go to your next life, so you carry something, whatever you have done in this life, your spiritual work, but that is not biased because we already have a hell and heaven. So, if I'm doing a good hell, Swarga and hell and heaven, we already have those things.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, if I'm doing a bad task in this life, I will go to hell and I will get punished. Then why I will punish again in my new life?
Vedanta doesn't believe in hell.
Oh.
No. Okay. Vedanta doesn't believe.
But I think in the
Vedanta, see, in Hindu tradition, there are 3 layers of thought systems. The highest layer is Vedanta, I mean the philosophy of Upanishad. When you take up the philosophy of Upanishad, it tells you that whatever you do will have its beneficial results. And of course, the other opposite also is true. Whatever unpleasant things, wrong things you do also have the results. But the point is, once you have exhausted the consequences of your unpleasant deeds or undesirable deeds, then you will recollect the good things you have done. and from the next life you will continue the journey. That's why frequently we develop an interest in spiritual life, not all the time when you are very strong. When we go through certain traumatic experiences and trial situations, then only we are forced to open our eyes, because very often we need some rude shock treatments sometimes. Not everyone, but frequently it happens. The reason is, but again, these shock treatments have the beneficial effect of directing your attention to something transcendent and spiritual, because of some good samskaras you already accumulated in your mental system. That's an important thing. So people have a kind of awakening, the desire to do something noble, to turn to some higher values. Not always when they are during early years. Sometimes they have to go through certain unpleasant experiences, shocking experiences. But these shocking experiences frequently will have the effect of sudden transformation. You can see the examples in the lives of even St. Francis of Assisi, Association of Francisco. We can see in Paul. In Indian spiritual traditions, there are very many examples. I can narrate one story that's again from the Bhagavad Purana that recited. This is very psychologically is very important. There was a man. It is the story. Those of you are interested in the story of Ajamila. This man was born in a good family, and he was an ideal son, an ideal member of his family. He led a very God-fearing life, very pure life. But then what happens? After some time, he had a deviation. He led a righteous life. He became a profligate. He became a curse to his parents, and also a problem to the whole society. And when he was about to die, there is a story behind the story. This story has a message. That's why Vyasa, the author of the book himself, says that the story is designed to convey a higher message. So you should not stop with the story. You should go with the message that's behind the story. The author himself says. So he says, this man, he became a prophet. Finally, it was time for him to die. He became an old man. But when he was young, he was 30 years old, he had a son, and the son's name was the name of God. One of the synonyms of God, Narayana, was given to his son. That's it. So when he was about to die, after leading this righteous life, he was about to die, he was helpless. So the story says the messengers came from hell to drag him away. But then he was afraid. Then what he did, he called his son to his side. Son's name was Narayana. But Narayana also one of the synonyms of Lord Vishnu, one of the Trinity in Hinduism. Then what happened? And then he remembered that this was the name why was Vishnu's synonym. He used to chant, he used to recite the great devotion when he was young, when he was 20 years old. So he suddenly remembered his early days. When he was a devotee, when he was growing up as an obedient son of his parents, he was going to temple, he used to meditate every day, he used to recite the holy names of the Trinity. Where that name was his son's name. He was not calling God, he was calling his son, the helpless old man. And immediately his mind went back, his early days. And immediately says, the agents who came from hell ran away, and the agents from God came and took him back. That's the story. Now remember, again we should not go after the literature of the story. We should go to the spiritual message of the story. Why could he think of God when he was actually calling his son? He had completely forgotten about his spiritual practices that he was practicing in his early days. Because suddenly he remembered, this was the name that I used to recite. So see, that's why you say, whatever you do, the kind of ideal word, deed, or spiritual discipline, that will be yours. You will not lose anything. Very often the fear that, what's the use of it? If I pray every day, then also what's the use? What proof is there? But actually, there are two pros. One is when you pray, you feel a kind of inner fulfillment and contentment. Another thing is, it will be there in your mental system. Just as you can imagine, people who have done wrong things when they were young, those memories haunt them when they become old. By the same logic, the good things that they have done in their early days will come to the relief, come as a blessing when they get old. That's why in spiritual life, we are never late and nothing will be lost. It doesn't mean that we should be complacent, we should be indifferent, we can postpone, not at all. What it means is, we are not going to lose anything. That's an important thing. So that's why spirituality can be brought into our everyday life by bringing an element of sanctity and sacredness to whatever work we do in the office, in the hospital, in the university, wherever we are. Spirituality is not something that can be practiced for just a few hours every week or just one day of the week. It is something that we can practice in the midst of doing and performing our everyday so-called secular activities. Otherwise, it is not spirituality. That should be the goal. But again, if one cannot achieve that goal in one day, there is no need to get disappointed. You reach that goal. So every ordinary spiritual, secular activity can have a spiritual dimension. Just we look at it from another perspective, it becomes a life-saving spiritual activity. That's it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Very nice. So apart from spirituality concept in our Sanatana Dharma, so I have one question. Like I found this very useful in my daily practice, like in my disciplined life and self, like the control of indriya, like senses. So in Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, Shri Krishna has mentioned very much. What are the best way of controlling senses?
Yeah, there is something very interesting in Gita itself. Lord Krishna makes a point. I can quote that. Na buddhi vedam janayed ajnanam karma sangam. What it means is, don't instruct anyone to practice spirituality overnight. Like practicing, don't teach a person to control the senses, control the mind overnight. The first step in spiritual life is to direct our senses into something positive, into something creative and constructive. We should never ever imagine that we can restrain or control our mind. What we actually mean by restraining the mind is to direct our mind into something creative and constructive. This is what we actually do. See, the mind flows towards external objects, to the five senses of perception. The eyes, when I see an object, my mind and the sense of sight come together, I see. So also, the mind and ears will hear things, and the mind and the sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste. These are five senses of perception. So everyone knows. Now, these right now, my mind is being directed towards all these external distracting objects. Instead of that, the mind should be directed towards something sublime, something creative, something constructive. How to do that? People spend their time reading sometimes undesirable things. So develop a tendency, a habit of reading something more positive, more creative, more fulfilling, more helpful. Again, all activities we do a lot of things. Along with that, we can do something meaningful. So I mentioned this morning, even the grossest kind of physical activity will produce spiritual energy. How do we recognize this spiritual energy? I'll give you an example. Suppose you help a person to cross the street. Suppose a blind man is standing across the street, you help him to cross the street. Nobody has seen, nobody has reported your compassion. But when you get back to your home, You feel, oh, I have done something. And you read in the newspapers some reports about some natural calamities unfolding in some distant countries. You do something to help the victims of that disaster. And you feel a little peace of mind. Maybe nobody knows about it except yourself. That's because your activity is generating spiritual energy. So the money that you may spend for wrong things, maybe unnecessary, undesirable things, is now diverted to something creative. The energy and the physical energy that you have, that you may not be always spending for creative purposes. Suppose you go and there's a temple or any religious place nearby, a church, whatever it is, you do some voluntary work there. In fact, why people come for doing voluntary work? They may not be recognizing this, because by doing that, they are getting something in return. They may not be aware of it. By doing that, they feel a kind of inner contentment. How people spend money, time and energy for many do many voluntary activities. The psychological mystery behind this, by doing that, they are generating spiritual energy. And when spiritual energy is generated, it expresses itself as a kind of inner feeling of contentment. I have done something worthwhile, something useful. That happens. That's because physical energy generates spiritual energy. Physical activity generates spiritual energy. So the first step is to divert our senses and mind to something creative and constructive. And when this happens, mind also begins to move and evolve. And then you find here, this mind right now is no more than one. Another mind comes. At the beginning of spiritual life, you feel conflict. But as we persist, you find another personality evolves. Like you call second personality in a different sense, not in spiritual context. Actually, you can see this happening when we try to meditate. If you are a beginner, you feel conflict. You want to get out of the room. You rather, or after meditating 1 hour with forced concentration, you would immediately open the TV impatiently. Or you want to take maybe San Francisco Chronicle. No offense, San Francisco is a wonderful thing. But you feel you want to drive your mind into something, you want to let out the steam because you have compressed energy in trying to meditate. That conflict is there. Now, what happens, after some time, your mind begins to enjoy meditation. So instead of spending our time and energy in anything non-creative, we should divert it to some creative activity. At a physical level, we can do a lot of great things. Physical activity helps you to change your mind. This is a very important thing. As Yoga Sutra and Vedanta also, this brings out this. This is not recognized by modern psychology. Modern psychology will tell you that your psychological condition will reflect in your activity. But your activity also will have influence on your mind. Our actions play a very important role in determining how our mind functions. Direct link is there actually. If a person goes on doing good things, great things, even when he is compelled to do that things, under compulsion, still eventually he will become a different person. So physical activity will change your mind. It's an important thing. So that's the first step. Anyone can take it up. So thank you. I have a wonderful session. Thank you.
Ask one more question.
Yeah.
You told that to become successful, we need two things. First one is effort, and second one is God's grace.
Yeah.
Then my question is, how can we get the God's grace?
Yeah. Of course. Now the point is, conventional believers in God, for them it's easy to believe in the grace of God. But the greatness of yoga and Vedanta is that they open their doors even to agnostics and even atheists. So one way to to get the benefit of surrendering to God is to have compassion for everyone and decide to do something that helps everyone for the good of others. There is a great statement in Vedanta, the Sanskrit statement. Its English translation is, you live your life in such a way that God will accept you even if you don't accept God. So God doesn't require our recognition of His ontological existence. God is not so vulnerable, that He requires our recognition certificate for existing. Thus, the statement is that you live your life in such a way that God will accept you whether you accept God or not. So if you can practice these human values, spiritual values, then you find suddenly you become spiritual. A man like Gandhi, I give an example. Gandhi is defined as a traditional God-fearing man. Everyone knows. But he very rarely went to temples. Very rarely he went to temples. And he almost never did any ritual. He had with him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. He used to read Bible also. He had a respect for all traditions. Now, this man is considered to be an archetypal Hindu. But very rarely he visited temple. He did visit, but not actually for worshipping. There were some temples in the state I'm coming from where in those days people of let's say the lower caste, not now, in those days, 1920s, 30s, were not allowed to visit the temples. Gandhi went there and fought for their rights, and the king, local king, had to open the temples to everyone. This is 1936. But remember, the same Gandhi spent many months there, but he did not enter the temple. Once the king agreed to open the temples for everyone, he came away. Now, and of course, he is recognized to be a great Hindu. So that's why you live your life in such a way that God accepts you even if you don't accept Him. Think of Buddha, maybe one of the greatest men the world has ever seen. He did not believe in the God idea as we understand God today. He did believe in some transcendental spirituality and liberation, nirvana. So that's an important thing. Thank you for the question.
Okay, so we are out of time. So thank you very much, Maharaj.
Thank you.